ancient India. The first chart there shows the flood in 1656, the Exodus in 2448, so it's that 792-year period. And so we've got the Tower of Babel falling in 1993. Sometime after the Tower of Babel, people begin to go to ancient India. And according to secular history, we've got the Dravidian group, which is the earliest inhabitants, and then later on another group came in, took some of the ideas, brought in Sanskrit, which is the language or the alphabet used there now, and those were called Aryans. The Guti is the first group that began driving out Hamites from Babylonia. So this is going to be during the time of Nimrod setting up his kingdom. The Guti are going to be, and we can look in the back in one of the charts and find out exactly which subgroup that is. But they were the ones that first started driving out Hamites. And we're going to see some of the Hamites that invaded up there are actually going to go out and go into India. The Guti were also called the Bactrians. Now, when you look up all these names, as far as like in Genesis chapter 5 and chapter 11, we've got the names of the nations. Josephus takes it a step further and gives you the Greek names for those. The Greek names are much more similar to what we know today. So the Javanites would call themselves Greece. The Romans would have their names, so the Bactrians. And you can look up in many places the Bactrians and see basically where they were at. So these people were the children of Gaither, the son of Aram, the son of Shem. So Shem's grandson started the Gaitherites, called the Guti or the Bactrians. This happened immediately after the death of Nimrod in 2123. So when the kingdom completely broke up, those that were managed to escape were run all the way out into India. One group of Hamites fled to the area of the Kopan River in India, and that's where we have the very basic start. Now remember, we've talked a little bit about the ancient pagan religion, how it was incorporated in Babylon and set up as the worship of false gods. Now Babylon has just been destroyed. All the little city-states are beginning to return to the people who actually should be ruling them in the first place. Some of the people are enslaved and other people have fled. The people fleeing, though, of course, are going to take part of this pagan religion with them. Now Josephus states that the sons of Joktan, son of Eber, namely Elmodad, Seleph, Asmaroth, Zerah, Adaraim, Azel, Dikla, Abel, Abimiel, Sabius, Ophir, Biliat, and Jobab. Now these guys inhabited the land up to the Kopan River Valley in India. So if you can stop and think about this on a map, and we can look at it later, but you've got Babylon, then you've got this area between there and where will be India. So right past Babylon would be where these guys settled and dwelled. Now the Gaitherites, or the Guti, the Bactrians, actually drove some of the Hamites out toward them. These people are going to rise up then and drive them even further. So these same Hamites then that were driven to this area by the Bactrians are then driven further by these people up to the Kopan River in India. And the ancient texts and almost all secular historians will say that that is the seat of the ancient Hindus. So they settled in the Indus Valley and became known as the Dravidians. And this is the start of the Vedic race. Not actually a race per se, but it's a subgroup of people. So we know there were Hamites intermingled with other people. They worshipped false gods based on what Nimrod did. Were driven out of there to Joktan's area. Joktan's people drove them out further into what will become India. Now, the secular people will talk about the Dravidic race. The people that are there now are Hindu, and basic Hinduism has been the same thing for at least a couple of thousand years. They received their information from an earlier race called the Dravidians. Now, Sanskrit, which is what all the ancient things are written in, so when we talk about Hinduism, we've got the Vedas, the Upanishads, and all those works. Those are all written in Sanskrit. The Aryans are the ones that brought the Sanskrit. The people that are the Dravidians, that are from before, wrote in a different language. And that, from my understanding, is yet to be deciphered. But assumably, modern Hinduism, which is the same thing as ancient Hinduism, is based on that, just simply written in a different language. So when you talk about the ancient Aryans and the Dravidians, that's where that comes into play. You'll probably remember one of the basic ideas for the Nazi regime was to bring back the Aryan race. The Aryans were supposed to be the superior, blonde, blue-eyed German people, that came in and took over. And if you could ever get back to that perfect person, we would develop our godlike powers and be very superior. As far as secular history goes, no one was there. All of a sudden, these people were there that had a similar religion to what's normally there now. They were Dravidians. The Aryans came in and replaced them and brought Sanskrit, and then we have written languages. The earliest known copy of the Rig Veda, which is like the main Veda, which Vedas are the main writings for Hinduism, dates to about 1400 BC. So the earliest copy that we know of would be about the same time as the Exodus from Egypt. And of course, since it's written in Sanskrit, we know that it existed further back beyond that. So anyway, the Dravidians were the start of the Vedic race, and we have that being Hamites from Babylonia. Their religion was an outgrowth of the original false religion developed by Nimrod. They have many writings, but their language has never been deciphered. Just a century or two later, a Japhetic race came down, intermarrying with the Dravidians, and they brought with them the Aryan language of Sanskrit. So according to what we've got so far then, we've got this mixture. And at this point, things stay pretty much the same. The same legends, the same gods, the goddesses, everything being written down. So the difference, and this is interesting to look at, the difference between Nimrod's death, which is 21:23 a.m., and the Exodus date of 2448 is 325 years. So the development of the Hindu religion as we know it happened in only 325 years. When you listen to a Hindu, they talk about the fact that they've been going on with this for at least 40 to 50,000 years in several different cycles, the basic Hinduism. But again, it's interesting, we don't have people there until those Hamites are driven out. The secondary note on this, since we're talking about the sons of Joktan are the ones that pushed them all the way out to the Indus River Valley, there is a legend among the Korean people that says that they were originally populated by descendants of Joktan, the son of Eber. And it'd be interesting to look at each one of those subgroups and see if there's any legends of things going back so far. In many cases, they're legends and not actually written. So Hinduistic history, we kind of tie all this together with what we know of Hindu mythology. Even inside of Hinduism, we have memories of real history. Hinduism teaches that the earth has been destroyed many times. In the last destruction, a man named Satavarya, also called Manu. We'll just call him Manu. That's a lot easier. Manu built a ship and escaped a great flood, landing on Mount Himarat in northern India. I thought that's interesting. Real similar to the story in the Bible, except the mountain's in a different place. The mountain's always going to be in your hometown. But again, there was a man whom escaped the great flood because God or the gods or something destroyed the planet, and he escaped. So everybody will be populated from him. And this is from the Hindu poem Mahabharata. Some of the ancient Greeks will take it and turn it around to be Mount Olympus. So whatever great mountain you have in your neighborhood, that's probably where your stories are going to point to. And that makes sense. They forget most of the story and they just know it was on a great mountain. Where's the tallest mountain around here? That one. What's it called? That must be it. And so a lot of things are going to do that. Remember, we didn't go through them all, but we've cataloged 600 different flood legends from around the world. So everybody's got a legend of a flood and our parents, whom we all come from, escaping the flood. Most of the time in a boat, sometimes by hiding under a rock in a mountain. But every ethnic group has a memory. Even the American Indians have a memory of a great flood that destroyed everything. If we were to believe Hinduism, the world has been created and destroyed, created and destroyed, created and destroyed. I think this is the 7th time around. And this Manu was about 50,000 years ago, and there was this great flood, and from him we're all descended. So you can see a mixture of truth based into that. Now, Hinduism is going to believe in evolution and reincarnation. Nobody's going to believe. There's several cults inside of Christianity. Rosicrucians, for one. It's kind of a semi-secret society. They have the same kind of a teachings that the earth has been destroyed and recreated, I think 3 or 4 times according to their theology. I remember when we started looking at this originally, we looked at how the flood destroyed everything and Noah was to replenish the earth, and we looked at how the word is the same when Adam is supposed to populate the earth. And the theory, the gap theory between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2, and some people think that there was an earth and it was destroyed and we were recreated. That's a theory that's been tossed around a lot, and I think we pretty much agreed based on all the evidence none of that was true. But some people take that and run with it and say it's happened many, many times. And of course, when you read the rest of the story, it gets really weird. There's Luciferian beings that we need to worship, according to Rosicrucians, that were the group of people here before. But this is the basic concept. So inside of Hinduism, which is paganism, we have this memory of the flood. Now, the Babylonian mystery religion, as mentioned in chapter 3, the original apostasy started with the teaching that God, the Creator, was an impersonal force, not a person to be feared or listened to. And we see that today in occultism and Wicca and Hinduism. It's basically a force. This impersonal force and other spirits or forces, however you want to term them, can be manipulated by magic and astrology. And that's the basic concept of the pre-flood religion. And our ancestors are beings that are intelligent, that are evolving into godhood. Either in the Hinduism way of going back, or the Buddhist way of going back into the nothing from which they came, or actually becoming gods somewhere. Now, Hinduism and Wicca, kind of comparing them. Hinduism and Wicca are probably the purest and the oldest forms of the Babylonian mystery religion. Both teach magic, astrology, multiple gods, evolution and reincarnation. Both teach the doctrine of emanation, and that, of course, is the idea that whatever God was, or the person or the force or whatever that thing was that created all of this, a little piece of him is in each one of us. That's why he doesn't exist anymore. Or if he does, he's only like a quarter of what he used to be, because the rest of him is in us. So that kind of a thing. God is in you rather than God being separate from creation, which is what the Bible and Christians and Jews have always taught. So they both teach that. Each man has a little piece of that creator force in him. In Hinduism, it actually has a name. It's called the Atman. So when you talk in Hinduism about the Atman, that's the little piece of God that's actually in you. In Wicca, the concept is very clearly taught, but it doesn't have a name. They would say whatever the creator thing, force was, completely emptied itself in creation and doesn't exist anymore. Okay? And so we're it, because we're the highest life form. Now, the following chart contrasts the teachings of the great apostasy of the Babylonian mystery religion, as we see in Genesis 10 and in Revelation 17, with the true religion practiced by Father Noah and the patriarchs. So, by comparison, and we can see this very easily, the true patriarchal religion taught a special creation. In other words, the literal Genesis. God created everything that there is, and after he got done and rested on the seventh day, he was still 100% God. He didn't put anything of himself into creation. The Babylonian mystery religion then would teach, in opposite of special creation, they would teach evolution, along with this idea of an emanation. They teach reincarnation, so you start off as a small, almost nothing kind of a thing, and as you evolve, die, reincarnate, evolve some more, and die, you eventually become a much, much more complex being, and you're on your way to becoming God. Whereas this patriarchal religion teaches a resurrection. So you were created, you didn't exist before you were conceived. You were created, and now you die, and your spirit is still around. Eventually God will resurrect your body, and you will be back to a glorified body, but similar to what you are now. You're not going to come back in a different body or stay disembodied. The Babylonian mystery religion, as we remember, taught astrology, and it wasn't the kind with the horoscopes, because we said that the horoscope was invented by the Chaldeans after the flood. So this form of astrology was just marking out the planets, the constellations, the new moons, the eclipses, and stuff like that, and knowing how to chart the time for magic rites in talking with gods and your ancestors. The patriarchal religion, we have no kind of astrology at all. They had many gods and many idols. We read that from Jasher. We believe there's only one true creator, and he's manifested himself in three, so that would be a trinity. The original creator God is an impersonal force, according to Hinduism and Wicca and the ancient pagans. We teach that the original creator God is a person. So he's a person, it has thoughts and feelings. They teach, point number 6, that there's a little piece of God in each one of us, which is probably why God either doesn't exist or isn't what he used to be. We teach that God is totally separate from creation. And they use magic rites to manipulate these spirits or forces or whatever you want to call it. We simply pray to God for answers. And we saw that when we looked at it, all the quotes from the early church fathers, how the church doesn't do anything by any kind of invocation, even to angels or saints. We don't pray to anybody but God. So anyway, that's a contrast between these. Now there's another example in Acts 19:19, the goddess Diana of the Ephesians. Paul instructs the new Ephesian Christian converts to burn their magic books. Now archaeology has unearthed some of these texts. The magic rites of Diana included spells, amulets, and talismans, invoking her for aid. So this is exactly the same thing found inside of Hinduism and Wicca. The idea of magic and talismans and amulets being endued with power where we can actually do something with it. Now in her case it was all focused on Diana, that was their goddess. In other religions it would be other gods or goddesses. Now here's another chart. This compares present-day world religions with the false teachings of the apostasy. So here's the world religions. We have Buddhism, Confucianism, Druidism, Hinduism, Jainism, Kabbalah, Shamanism, Shinto, Sikhs, Sufis, Taoism, Voodoo, Wicca, and Zoroastrianism. Those are the basic ones inside of paganism. Notice every single one of them teaches a form of magic. Same thing we're talking about. Amulets, talismans to their god or goddesses and or forces, whatever they want to call them. Abbreviated at the top, MAG is belief in magic. The next one is CEF. They believe that the creator exists, but is simply an impersonal force. You can see half of them believe that. There's only two there that actually says the Creator no longer exists, but was an impersonal force. He's totally emptied in creation. So we really are the closest thing to any kind of God that there is. And that's inside of Buddhism and Wicca. The other teach that there's something left of God, but not a whole lot. CEP is that the Creator exists and is actually a person. They believe in a personal God, which is a little different, a little going away from the original pagan religions. So this would be, for instance, Druidism and Hinduism. Hinduism has got this impersonal idea, but they still have the concept of the Atman. Existent as a person. That's just Jainism and Voodoo and Zoroastrianism. And of course, down here at the bottom, we've got the three main branches of the true religion, which would be Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, all based on the Old Testament, one way or the other, the concept of Father Abraham and what that was taught. So Christianity, Islam, and Judaism all teach that God exists but is a person. MG is the belief in multiple gods or creators, and we have that list mentioned there. Emanations is the clear teaching of the doctrine of emanation, that whatever God was is now in you, and he either is less than what he used to be or doesn't exist at all. And they all kind of sort of go along with this, but specifically mentioned in their religious texts. That would be Jainism, Hinduism, Kabbalah, Sikh, Sufi, and Wicca. And RE there, the last one, is reincarnation. And we can see every single one of these teach reincarnation, except for the Sikhs and Voodoo. And remember what the Sikhs were. This is kind of interesting too. The Sikhs were the ones that were a combination of Hinduism and Islam. They were the ones that decided that Islam is correct, there is no God but Allah, but they go ahead and say that the Hindu gods are actually kind of a manifestation of him. And they try to combine the two religions. So since they're partially Islamic, they don't believe in reincarnation. And Voodoo has that whole concept of being enslaved to the Loa and raising people from the dead. The Voodoo doctors do that stuff, zombies. The majority teach reincarnation. Every single one of them have a belief in magic except for Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. The time of the great harlot church is approaching. And we're told in Revelation 17 that at the end time there will be this harlot church, in other words, a counterfeit church that rides on the beast. And the Antichrist will be here and all that stuff will be going on. And it says that her name is Mystery Babylon, and Mystery Babylon was the mother of harlots. And God usually talks about things in spiritual terms. So spiritual adultery is actually leaving your espoused husband, or God, in other words, and following a false god. That kind of a concept is used a lot throughout the Old Testament. So Babylon, Mystery Babylon, is the mother of all the harlots of the earth. So in other words, all the other weird little pagan religions all sprang from what we consider Mystery Babylon. And Mystery Babylon was Nimrod's unique way of pulling it all together and based very strongly on the ancient pagan religion. So we have this one thing to look for. But we're told in Revelation that as that day approaches, we're going to start going back to it. And this Mystery Babylon will be the one church for everything. So based on what it was and what it will become, we should be able to stop and look for signs to see if it's getting here anytime soon. So we want to be on the lookout for any form of apostasy creeping into the church under different names, any kind of these concepts. So evolution and reincarnation go hand in hand. We've seen that. Evolution is already gaining great acceptance in many Christian churches. Replacing the teaching of the resurrection with reincarnation can't be far behind. So we can see that because in a lot of the churches, they believe in evolution now. That means there was no flood, worldwide flood at least, and Genesis is a myth. So that's been set aside. So if all that's set aside, maybe we do reincarnate. Maybe there is no judgment. That's the kind of lie Satan is going to be giving. Now, there's no Christian denominations that I know of by name that teach reincarnation. Unity is one of the Christian cults that teaches reincarnation. But there's been a lot of Christian churches or Christian denominations that have brought in evolution. So that's coming. The next point of the apostasy will probably be the I am a little God concept, and that comes from the doctrine of emanations. And you can see that if instead of believing God is totally separate from creation, if God put a little piece of himself in each one of us, then we can develop our powers and we're on our way to becoming a little God. And we see that in the cults, and we've saw it in the cults for a long time. Inside of mainstream Christianity, we've saw it with the extreme word faith movement. Not completely, but definitely drifting that direction. So anybody that commands God to do something, brings down angels, says that they are a little God, and they are developing their godlike powers, anything along those lines, of course, is paganism. And we begin to see that creep into the church. We could probably stop and look at the chart and try to stop and think of several of these other things that will eventually creep in. I don't see astrology creeping in anytime soon, but special creation has already been replaced in a lot of churches with evolution. The resurrection is not clearly taught anymore. Many churches, if you press them, will say, yeah, we really believe Jesus came out of the tomb. But a lot of them will say, or at least focus on the fact of the real meaning of Easter is the resurrection of a new life, and it's a time to turn over a new leaf, and God will be pleased with you if you go help people. And they make everything kind of allegorical. If you pin them down, they'll still say, yeah, we believe it. But then in a lot of churches now, they'll actually say, well, no, I don't believe Jesus actually healed people. When we read about a healing, it's telling us that we should reach out to our fellow man and comfort them and kind of heal them emotionally. That's the symbolism behind it. And whether that symbolism is true or not, the fact that Jesus actually healed people and that proves his divinity is the main point. But they're actually beginning to get away from that. One true creator, one God being manifest in the cults. That's our definition of a cult, is anybody that claims to be a Christian but doesn't embrace the concept of the Trinity or the deity of Christ. And so all those groups like Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, Christian Science, they all have some other kind of God idea. Christian Science flat out says that there's no resurrection. Christ or Jesus is not the Christ. So anyone that counters that, and we see that in the realm of the cults, there's actually more cults than there are Christian groups. Of course, that makes sense because there's a lot of, and I say Christian groups, but any Trinitarian Christian group, even if you don't consider them Christian. Whereas cults, you have maybe a guy next door with 3 people in his house, and that's a weird cult. So we've got lots of those, but we're beginning to see people not enduring sound doctrine and going away from that. There's people that teach that God was not totally separate from his creation. And it seems like a very small point, and it is, other than it leads to this great apostasy. I have some Nazarene friends that are debating that very vigorously, whether God is totally separate from his creation or a part of it in some sense. And a lot of us no longer pray to God for answers. We try to positively confess things. And so, again, we can look at all of these things and see how this stuff begins to come in. Anything connected with the concept of magic. See, the basic concept is you've got a personal God that may or may not choose to do whatever he chooses to do. And you can pray to him and ask him, either rightly or wrongly, for him to do something. That's prayer. Anything outside of that would be considered magic. So if you're going to try to manipulate God, if there is an object that is empowered by a priest or anything along those lines. When we take communion and say that when it's blessed, it actually becomes physical body and physical blood, or spiritually is empowered with something, and then if you eat it, it imparts grace. That's based on magic. The ancient church fathers mention that one of the Gnostics named Marcus actually is the one that started the concept of transubstantiation. It changes when he blesses it. And Irenaeus said that's a demonic teaching, and anybody who believes it has to be crack-brained. And so there's lots of examples of these kind of things. In the Old Testament, Moses used the serpent on the pole to symbolize Christ. People got to thinking that maybe there's some sort of leftover magic or God presence in that serpent, and they started almost worshiping it. So one of the kings of Israel took it and ground it to powder, called it Nehushtan, meaning just a thing of brass. It's a piece of junk. So if you're going to take a holy relic, which we ought to keep around to show what God has done, but if you're going to worship it or you think it's got some sort of power in it, get rid of the thing. That's you going down the path of paganism. So anything we have like that, when you think someone's possessed and you hold up a cross, back, this kind of thing, what's that got to do with anything? Jesus died on a cross, but these are my fingers. That's got nothing to do with anything. So when you think there's a power in an object, you're crossing that line. Now, granted, the Scripture says that when we pray, and whenever 2 or more of us are gathered, the Lord's here in our midst. And so when we take communion and we focus on what the Lord has done, the Lord forgives our sins. Sometimes people get healed because they're getting right with the Lord. It's got nothing to do with the elements. You don't have to come to a church and be prayed for by the elders in order to get healed. That's the formula. But it's not because you walked into a church that you got healed because of the faith. So anyway, those are the examples of things we need to look for and be careful of. In the Eastern Orthodox Church and the Roman Catholics, they pray to saints, which is actually forbidden. But they pray to saints or ask them to pray for them. One of the concepts I was told was when you have a statue of a saint and it's dedicated in the appropriate way in an Eastern Orthodox church, when you come to that church and you pray to that saint in front of that statue, you have a greater chance of the prayer being answered. Because when you dedicate it, however they do it, it actually kind of like opens a portal or a doorway, and it kind of makes it's not a guaranteed thing, but it's easier to communicate that way. That's kind of leftover paganism. Of course, the whole idea that holy water would make it holier, and so if it's done properly, it's the same thing as when you go to a witch doctor or a Wiccan, and they give you a little amulet to wear around your neck. It's been done just right, and it's got some sort of force to it. That's the same concept. And there is no such thing as forces. We have gods and we have demons. So we have God, rather. So that's the basic conclusion. Not a whole lot of information on ancient India other than the basic start. So when Nimrod died and everything got displaced and everybody ran away, there was a group of Hamites that left there, went through Joktan's area, went down into there and started the Indian race. Those were the Dravidians. We still haven't translated their text yet, so we don't know really what that religion was. That would really be interesting to do, though. If there's a difference between Dravidian and Aryan Hinduism, we know the Dravidian is much closer, if not the exact one that Nimrod developed. It'd be kind of interesting to see what, if there any differences are. And we have an approximate time. Again, all this took place inside of 300 years. All this information was taken from Jasher, Josephus, Antiquities of the Jews, and some from the Jewish Talmud.